another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the August 13th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under Business and Finance are: the annual inflation rate fell slightly to 3.4% in July, easing pressure on the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates next month. Major U.S. stock indexes put up mild gains and losses in the wake of the report on consumer prices. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ rose 0.3% and 0.5% respectively, and the Dow fell less than 0.1%. A group led by Bob Iger and Joshua Kushner agreed to buy a controlling interest in the Los Angeles Lakers from Mark Walter, who also owns the Los Angeles Dodgers and whose financial empire is the subject of a federal probe. Paramount in recent months has discussed creating an editorial board for CNN and other safeguards to ease concerns about its news operations independence. Bank of America said it plans to inject $250 billion into an infrastructure endeavor that aims to increase U.S. investment in data centers, energy, and critical minerals. Goldman Sachs said it would pay up to $2.25 billion to acquire NEOS, N-E-O-S, Investments, a provider of actively managed exchange-traded funds with $30 billion in assets. Apple is discussing new deals with publishers to use their content to deliver current news and information, part of an effort to improve its Siri voice assistant. Two media organizations sued Trump over his namesake company's real-time feed of top Truth Social accounts, arguing that selling preferential access to the president's statements is unconstitutional. Eli Lilly filed 6 new lawsuits against U.S. entities that it alleges are selling a version of the company's investigational weight loss drug on the black market. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. Federal aviation officials plan to move air traffic control antennas and implement new procedures to avoid a repetition of last week's safety incident with Marine One near a busy Washington, D.C. airport. David Crowley narrowly won the Democratic nomination for governor in Wisconsin, defeating Democratic Socialist Francesca Hung. A former director at the Southern Poverty Law Center was arrested and charged for allegedly overseeing secret payments to informants from white supremacist groups. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, one of President Trump's closest advisors, will step down at the end of the month. Russian and Ukrainian attacks on ships and port infrastructure in the Black Sea, a major route for the transport of grain, was putting other countries on edge. U.S. troops and armored vehicles fared poorly against Ukrainian drone units in a military exercise in Germany earlier this year. Few ships are crossing the Strait of Hormuz despite President Trump's claim on Wednesday that the U.S. has total control of the strategic waterway. Crews rescued 211 people and recovered the body of a passenger from a ferry that caught fire in rough seas near the Indonesian island of Bali. Died Zhu Ranji, 97, former premier who drove China's economic overhaul. The picture on today's front page is a composite of 3 photos showing the various stages of a total eclipse. And that caption reads, "Lights out." A total solar eclipse was visible Wednesday in parts of the Arctic and Europe. Some of the best views were in Spain from an observatory and a portable planetarium. A partial eclipse over the Czech Republic was visible. And that title, "Eclipse Compels Millions to Turn to the Dark Side." Articles from the front page follow. Far left hits a wall in the Midwest. Contest in Michigan and Wisconsin spotlight the limits of candidates, by Sabrina Rodriguez and John McCormick. Middleton, Wisconsin. Democratic Socialist Francesca Hong was expected to cruise to victory in Tuesday's gubernatorial primary in Wisconsin after months of grassroots organizing and polls consistently showing her with a double-digit lead over the field. Instead, she narrowly lost the nomination to a more mainstream Democrat in this battleground state. In neighboring Michigan, progressive Abdul El-Sayed held a similar commanding lead in polls, only to eke out a win a week earlier over a centrist lawmaker by a single percentage point. The ascendant far left is hitting turbulence in the Midwest, where voters are showing that the big victories they have had in deep blue pockets of the country are much tougher to secure in purple areas. While progressives have been gaining ground in races across the country, the mixed results show that there are limits on the movement and its appeal outside of major cities. It also serves as the latest reminder that the continuing debate over the Democratic Party's identity is still raging. "The Midwest is not Manhattan," said Charles Franklin, director of a Wisconsin statewide poll conducted by Marquette Law School. "There are limits." Still, Franklin said, Wisconsin and Michigan showed the very progressive elements in the party have a stronger position than we have previously seen. Hong, a dues-paying member of the Democratic Socialist of America, represents one of Wisconsin's most liberal legislative districts in the state assembly, and exploded onto the national political scene as the surprise front-runner in the governor's race. She backs legalizing marijuana to fund high-speed broadband and supports a state-run development bank, taxpayer-subsidized child care, government-run grocery stores, the elimination of all college debt, and Medicare for all. She once called for canceling Thanksgiving because she saw it as a colonizer holiday, although she walked that back in the final weeks of the campaign. Some of her views prompted concerns among voters about electability, a vulnerability emphasized by Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley and Governor Tony Evers in the closing weeks of Crowley's successful campaign. That electability argument certainly played into some late decisions, Franklin said. Inflation cooled slightly to 3.4% in July. Tame reading, aided by gasoline prices, gives Fed less cause to raise interest rates. Shelter costs rose just modestly, largely because hotel rates fell. By Matt Grossman. The annual inflation rate fell slightly to 3.4% in July, easing pressure on the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates next month. Stop and start peace negotiations in the Middle East brought a respite for gasoline prices, and so-called core prices, which exclude the volatile food and energy categories, rose by 0.2% in July from the previous month, a relatively modest increase, offering hope that broader price pressures could be abating. Underlying inflation trends are especially decisive right now for the central bank, where policymakers are grappling with whether and when to raise interest rates. Wednesday's report might make the Fed more comfortable waiting to see if inflation keeps cooling on its own, rather than trying to tamp it down with rate increases. The 3.4% reading from the Labor Department was lower than June's 3.5%. Core prices rose by 2.5% over the past 12 months, down from 2.6% in the year through June. That reading essentially ties February's as the lowest recorded since 2021. Iran war developments have jolted energy markets since the conflict began in late February. For much of July, improved optimism for a peace deal pulled down gasoline prices, although they have rebounded more recently. Last month, gasoline prices were down 2.9% versus June. Even so, gasoline prices remain 25% higher than a year earlier. Fed officials have for the past year forecast that inflation would return to its 2% goal without further rate increases, but more of them had changed their view in favor of raising rates. Outside of big recent swings in energy prices, underlying inflation trends have been more stubborn than Fed policymakers would like. For inflation to fall sustainably back toward the Fed's goal of 2%, the economy likely needs not just cheaper gasoline, but also cooler increases across categories such as housing, airfares, and auto insurance. Whether companies can keep passing along higher prices to consumers across the rest of the economy will depend in large part on the financial health of shoppers. Consumers have been resilient so far, but many are exhausted from 5 years of elevated inflation, and they are facing an uncertain labor market. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Investors keep over $3 trillion cash pile on sideline by Miriam Gottfried. Since Don Ross retired as an airline pilot a decade ago, all the financial planners he has spoken with have wanted him to invest his cash. He isn't sold. He is keeping 85% of his portfolio in stocks and the rest in a money market fund yielding 3.62%. Ross looked at historical bear markets and determined they typically don't last longer than 3 years. He keeps enough of his portfolio in cash to comfortably get himself through that period, and he sells stocks when he needs to replenish his cash pile. The financial planners have suggested bond funds, but to the 75-year-old, there couldn't be a worse stream of income. He is also among the investors giving headaches to the money managers who want them to part ways with their cash. Individual investors are sitting on a mountain of it. There is over $3 trillion in retail money market funds hovering around a record high, according to the Investment Company Institute. And that doesn't include the trillions of institutional dollars sitting in money market funds. Assets flooded into these funds in 2022 when the Federal Reserve ended its policy of near zero interest rates. Money market yields rose above 5%. Rates have since fallen, but money market funds, which now yield 3.49% on average, according to Crane data, have retained their appeal. StubHub customers face long battles over refunds. Burn ticket holders complain of inferior replacement seats, ordeals to recoup money, stuck outside a World Cup game. 3 hours before the U.S. played Paraguay in the World Cup in June, Ricky Zaragoza was standing outside SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California, with his father and no tickets. He had waited for this day since March 2025, when he paid $2,162.90 for a pair of seats as a birthday gift for his father. 4 days earlier, Zaragoza had called online ticketing platform StubHub to say his tickets still weren't in the FIFA app. The company promised replacements by noon the next day. At kickoff, Zaragoza was still without tickets. He approached the stadium's guest service windows. "You're here because of StubHub, aren't you?" he recalled a stadium employee saying. She gestured at a crowd of at least 40 people. "You're not the only one. All these people are here because of StubHub." StubHub's terms of service require disputes to be resolved through private arbitration, not the courts. The company has changed its designated mailing address for customers to send a notice of dispute at least 7 times since January 2025. This very long article explains that many customers have not resolved their disagreement with StubHub. Iger and Kushner set to buy Lakers for $12.5 billion. By Andrew Beaton. A group led by Bob Iger and Joshua Kushner have agreed to buy a controlling interest in the Los Angeles Lakers from Mark Walter, the billionaire who owns the Los Angeles Dodgers and whose financial empire is the subject of a federal probe. Kushner and Iger are in agreement to buy a majority stake in the basketball franchise in a deal that values it around $12.5 billion, according to people familiar with the deal, marking the highest ever valuation for any sports team. Walter bought the Lakers last year from the Buss family, which had owned the team since 1979 and maintained a minority stake. That deal valued the storied NBA team at $10 billion, a record price tag at the time. The decision by Walter to sell the Lakers to a firm backed by Kushner and Iger, the former Disney chief executive who is also an advisor to Kushner's Thrive Capital, is a stunning twist. Walter, the 66-year-old CEO of Guggenheim Partners, is in the crosshairs of a federal investigation examining the inner workings of his financial empire. The investigation is looking into whether private credit deals involving his companies constituted fraud. Walter's businesses have denied any wrongdoing. The sale, which still requires NBA approval, marks the latest push by Kushner, the brother of President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, into sports. Now for other articles within the paper. The FAA plans further training for controllers after the Marine One incident. FAA to shore up Marine One safety, by Andrew Tangell. Federal aviation officials are planning to move air traffic control antennas and implement new procedures to avoid a repeat of last week's safety incident with Marine One near a busy Washington, D.C. airport. The planned changes, which also include boosting radio signals, aim to reduce potential communications interference at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport and ensure controllers clear the airspace of commercial traffic before the president's helicopter takes off, people familiar with the matter said. The measures are directed at addressing operational gaps identified in the episode, including an unintelligible transmission to air traffic controllers who failed to notify a nearby passenger jet of the president's helicopter. On August 4th, a military helicopter carrying President Trump took off from the White House, bound for Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. Air traffic controllers didn't halt commercial flights at Reagan National as required under safety protocols, the Wall Street Journal reported. The Federal Aviation Administration has said that Marine One and a commercial jet taking off from the airport briefly got too close under federal safety protocols to keep aircraft separated in the air. The agency said the aircrafts weren't converging and the president wasn't in danger. The National Transportation Safety Board is investigating. U.S. and Ukraine dueled in a drill. Kyiv's drones won. The expectation is that failures in these military exercises are educational. U.S. Army troops faced off against Ukrainian drone operators at a military exercise in Germany this year. It didn't go well for the Americans. By Alistair MacDonald, Laura Seigelman, and Daniel Michaels. During the exercise called Combined Resolve, Ukrainian drone units easily spotted and defeated U.S. troops and armored vehicles on rotation from Fort Hood in Texas. People familiar with the event said. The exercise, coupled with U.S. casualties in Iran, shows American vulnerabilities to drones, years after the U.S. made uncrewed systems an essential part of warfare. America pioneered using long-range drones in war. The Pentagon has recently spent billions acquiring drone and counter-drone technology and formed special units to operate it. Still, in the Middle East this year, the U.S. has struggled to defend against Iran's drones, which have killed and injured soldiers and destroyed aircraft. The drubbing in Germany conveyed lessons from Ukraine focused on short-range battlefield drones. The exercise, held in April and May, tested visiting troops' ability to operate and defend against the proliferation of smaller frontline drones that have dominated the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Exercises like Combined Resolve are run precisely so that forces can experience realistic combat conditions. Army leaders in Europe over recent years have taken advantage of having Ukrainian forces on hand to participate and impart their skills to U.S. and allied troops in practice on simulated battlefields. The expectation is that failures are educational. British and Swedish exercises have also resulted in Ukrainian triumphs. Few ships cross strait despite Trump's claim of control. By Rebecca Feng and Georgie Kanchev. President Trump said Wednesday the U.S. has total control of the Strait of Hormuz. The reality on the water tells a different story. Ship tracking data shows just 14 vessels on Tuesday crossed a waterway that routinely handled more than 130 a day before the war. 11 of those ships took the route administered by Iran. Traffic was slow through July, with an average of 26 crossings a day, and in June with 33 a day, as renewed Iranian attacks on ships cut short a deal to open the strait. The disconnect shows how Tehran has managed to squelch traffic with relatively little military force, only a handful of drone and missile attacks on ships. Iran doesn't need to defeat the U.S. Navy. It just needs shipping companies, captains, and insurers to believe ignoring its dictates could get a ship hit. Iran is using the fear factor of real physical risk to retain a measure of control, said Rachel Zimba, an adjunct senior fellow at the Center for a New American Security, a Washington think tank. The risk-reward is simply not there for many global tankers. Trump pushed back Wednesday on social media, saying Iran has no way to force its will on the waterway with its armed forces decimated by the war and the country struggling with a spiraling economy. The U.S. has total control over the Strait of Hormuz. I think we will keep it, the president said, and there is nothing Iran can do about it. He ended the post saying, "Praise be to Allah." While the U.S. Navy has guided a number of tankers through the strait, taking some pressure off energy markets, it remains an effort around the margins. Iran's grip on the strait has cost the world more than 2.6 billion barrels of oil since the U.S. and Israel launched the war in February. Saudi Aramco Chief Executive Amin Nasser said last week. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, Mandani's latest target, Amazon. The city wants to ban the subcontracting business model to help the Teamsters. Sooner or later, in today's America, if you are successful in business, you will be targeted as guilty of some alleged political sin. It doesn't matter how many jobs you create or what services you provide. Ask Amazon. On Monday, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani endorsed the Teamsters-backed Delivery Protection Act, introduced by Democratic Socialist of America Council member Tiffany Shaban. The bill would force Amazon to reclassify subcontractors and workers in its delivery network as employees. It could also potentially hit those of other delivery companies, such as FedEx. The Teamsters and its left-wing allies are using New York City to test drive the ban on subcontracting, which they hope to take nationwide. Mr. Mamdani's office says Amazon and others use subcontractors to shield them from responsibility, which leaves workers vulnerable and corporations free to avoid accountability for reckless conditions on city streets. That's a misdirection. Amazon's last mile delivery network relies on some 40 subcontractors, which employ more than 5,000 workers. This sophisticated network is what can get the goods you order to your doorstep in hours, and it provides flexibility for workers who have irregular schedules, such as college students and home caretakers. Amazon requires its subcontractors to provide full-time employees health coverage and paid time off. Subcontractor drivers earn on average roughly $24 an hour. Many subcontractors offer additional benefits, including tuition assistance and paid vacation. These small businesses reflect the diversity that progressives claim to favor. Amazon says 25% are owned by Black or Hispanic entrepreneurs, 10% are veteran-owned, and 10% are graduates of our Road to Ownership program, a company initiative that helps high-performing employees become business owners. Subcontractors also provide workers' compensation for workers injured on the job. Vans are equipped with technology that notifies subcontractors of unsafe driving behavior. The cargo e-bikes that couriers peddle around Manhattan cannot travel faster than 12 miles per hour. If New York City streets are becoming more perilous, don't blame Amazon. One goal of the bill is to aid plaintiff attorneys who figure they can obtain bigger legal payouts for accidents from Amazon than they could from its small business partners. Directly employing subcontractors could also impel Amazon to carry more expensive insurance coverage, which would raise delivery cost. A study commissioned by the Five Boroughs Jobs Campaign, a coalition of economic development groups that has received funding from Amazon, estimated that the Delivery Protection Act would increase household costs by $664 a year. Amazon warns that hefty compliance costs could force it to relocate its 10 distribution centers outside the reach of city politicians and regulators, perhaps Long Island or New Jersey. Say goodbye to same-day delivery. Driving the attack on Amazon is Teamsters President Sean O'Brien. United Parcel Service has laid off tens of thousands of workers, in part as a result of its expensive 2023 labor contract with the Teamsters. Amazon subcontractors are now delivering many packages for the company that Teamsters UPS workers previously did. The National Labor Relations Act doesn't allow sub and independent contractors to unionize. By banning the subcontractor model, the bill could enable the Teamsters to unionize Amazon drivers and couriers. Mr. O'Brien held a rally Monday for the bill with DSA members, including Ms. Chaban and State Assemblywoman Claire Valdez, who in June won a House primary. Socialist influencer Hassan Piker is promoting the bill on social media. All of this makes Vice President J.D. Vance's efforts to court the Teamsters boss all the more bizarre. Abolishing the independent contracting model has been a long-time goal of the political left, and they don't mind if they run over the little guy in the process. What China might have been. Zhu Ranji tried to keep the country on a path of market reform. It's easy to forget that China's present economic travails and diplomatic and strategic rivalries weren't inevitable. For a period in the 1990s and early 2000s, it looked as if the country might be on a path toward lasting reforms and a greater openness to the rest of the world. That was the project of Zhu Ranji, the former premier who died Wednesday at age 97. As the second most powerful official in the Communist Party and state from 1998 to 2003, under President Jiang Zemin, Zhu made economic reform the focus of his tenure. He is best remembered outside China for negotiating its entry into the global economy via World Trade Organization, WTO, membership in 2001. That agreement forced Beijing to make policy concessions, including reducing tariffs on agriculture and opening politically sensitive industries such as banking to foreign investment. In the decades since, Beijing has failed to live up to many of its WTO promises, and Western protectionists often assume it intended from the start to cheat on the deal. Reformers such as Zhu, however, hoped the agreement would entrench their program. That was a big reason Western free marketeers, including these columns, supported the deal. It was worth trying, giving the benefits for the world of a China that evolved in a free direction. Imagine how different the world would be now. Xu's domestic program made headway for several years. It included shrinking state-owned companies, cutting government bureaucracy, creating a private housing market, and rationalizing public finances in a way that allowed Beijing to function as a modern state. China's commitment to these measures contributed to hope that it was on track for further market reforms. Some of Xu's efforts inadvertently set the stage for the country's current problems. Particularly damaging has been the combination of a private real estate market and fiscal policies that encourage local governments to borrow heavily against future land revenue. Yet, had Beijing followed through on the financial liberalization envisioned in the WTO agreement, the housing market might not have grown so distended or the balance sheets of local governments so precarious. Leaders after Xu, notably President Hu Jintao, reversed some of Hu's reforms, especially on state-owned enterprises, and ended the free market drive. The great contradiction in Xu's career is that he never seems to have doubted the necessity of the Communist Party control. He kept the faith despite being a victim himself of serial purges in the Mao Zedong years that offered him first-hand evidence of the destructive caprice of single-party rule. He often railed and acted against the evils of corruption without admitting or realizing that this is inevitable in a political system such as China's that ultimately relies for consent on political coercion. The party, on his watch, continued to deny the essential link between political freedom and prosperity. Cruelties such as the one-child policy persisted. It's hard to know how China might have changed if Xu's generation of reformers had continued in power. But Xu's successors have reasserted party control over the economy's commanding heights. That's a tragedy for China and for the world. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the opinion pages, 7 Steps to Defeat Dems and the DSA. Far-left candidates give an opening to the GOP in the midterms. Can they use it wisely? By Karl Rove. The victories of far-left Senate Democratic candidates like Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan, Troy Jackson in Maine, Peggy Flanagan in Minnesota, and others in assorted House districts give Republicans openings for the midterms, but only if handled correctly. President Trump missed the mark last week in Las Vegas when promoting his tax exclusion for tips. He opened the argument smartly, saying Republicans are working every day to defend the American dream for you and your children. But then he claimed the radical left, the maniacs, they're trying to destroy it with the disaster known as not socialism, but communism. These are communist. Mr. Trump suggested Republicans should say that if Democrats prevail, then you'll have nothing but death, squalor, poverty. This might have cheered his true believers, but didn't gain a single vote. Instead, it showed that he doesn't understand public opinion, how he got elected, or what it'll take to win this fall. In the Real Clear Politics average of recent polls, Mr. Trump's overall approval rating is 39%. On specific issues, his numbers are often worse. On handling inflation, it's 31%. Iran, 36%. Russia and Ukraine, 37%. The economy, 37%. Foreign policy, 38%. He exceeds his overall approval number only on immigration, 44%, and crime, 45%. Even then, a majority disapprove of his handling of every issue. The president dismisses bad numbers as fake polls, but his pollsters probably see similar results. In 2024, I'd say that a bit more than a third of voters, around 35%, voted for him because they adored him. He could do no wrong in their eyes. They loved what he said and the middle finger he gave the media, elites, and opponents. But they alone weren't enough to elect him. Mr. Trump got 49.8% of the popular vote and a 1.5-point victory in 2024 because, by my estimation, about 14% or 15% of voters decided that for all his flaws, they'd still vote for him. Things were better when he was in office, and they couldn't stand 4 more years of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. She was an extension of the Biden presidency. It was risky, but voting for Mr. Trump was voting for change. No longer. But these reluctant 2024 Trump supporters are still crucial. Winning them over this fall requires that Republicans do 7 things. First, don't gaslight voters. The president claimed in Las Vegas that he produced the greatest economy we've ever had so far, with the cost of rent, groceries, and other staples coming down very fast. How many swing voters believe that? Claims that collide with Americans' day-to-day experience got Mr. Biden into trouble, and now Mr. Trump too. Second, screaming communist won't win additional votes. Instead, use a Democratic candidate's own words and policies. Remember the Trump 2024 they-them ad featuring footage of Kamala Harris endorsing transgender surgery for convicts? Make Democratic candidates eat anything they say that's extreme. Third, don't let Democrats get away with disavowing past outrageous positions. Point out how convenient their changes are. Ask when and why they changed their minds. Raise doubts, suggesting that they're untrustworthy and nothing keeps them from reverting to those extreme views. Fourth, don't let Democrats escape from dangerous associations. If someone like Hassan Piker campaigned for them, or another Democrat on the same ticket, make every Democrat defend every terrible comment Mr. Piker has made. Ask why Democrats would ever associate with someone like that. Fifth, Republicans, especially those running against candidates endorsed by the Democratic Socialist of America, or opponents who share their state ticket with DSA-backed Democrats, must explain why the DSA's agenda won't work and will hurt voters. The DSA doesn't want Americans to have a landlord or mortgage. That logically means the government would assign your housing and you couldn't accumulate wealth by buying a home and letting it grow in value. Sixth, force normal Democrats to disavow DSA policies. Yes, that gives some Democrats an opportunity to say they won't abolish ICE, defund the police, or close prisons. But that could discourage some of their left-wing supporters from turning out. Finally, Republicans can't simply run on having done a good job last year. They must show concrete plans to make things better next year. There was practically none of that in the president's hour-plus Las Vegas speech. Near its end, he spent 39 seconds on a new health care plan and 1 minute on the SAVE Act. Not enough. GOP candidates had better offer more fresh ideas and spend plenty of time on them. Mr. Trump's yelling communists gets headlines, but won't convert swing voters, and it drowns out messages Republicans need to win. There's a better way. You can take it with you to Florida. Moving from a high-tax state to one with no income tax is like a 30% increase in pay. By Stephen Moore. Would you consider moving to get a 30% pay increase? We know from IRS state return data that this is exactly what many high-income Americans are doing, only they're changing where they're taxed, not necessarily where they work. Consider a successful couple living in Beverly Hills, California, or Manhattan, with a joint income of $5 million. The top marginal state and local income tax rate in California and New York City is between 14% and 15%. The highest federal tax rate is roughly 40%. So, in California and New York, a wealthy couple pays a combined tax rate of 54% and keeps 46 cents of each additional dollar they earn. If they move to Florida, Tennessee, Texas, or another state with no income tax, they keep 60 cents instead of 46. They've given themselves a 30% pay raise. If you live in a state with approximately a 10% income tax, such as Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Jersey, Vermont, or Washington, they get a roughly 22% after-tax pay raise by moving to Florida or Texas. Some Democrats think they can discourage interstate tax migration by raising federal taxes. Senators Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts have proposed eliminating the income cap on the Social Security payroll tax, which would raise the effective federal tax rate by 12.4 points. One Republican, Senator Bernie Moreno of Ohio, has also endorsed this idea. Yet these proposals would heighten the incentive to flee high-tax states. With the Social Security cap gone, the federal tax on income would be roughly 52%. A Californian or New Yorker would pay a 66% combined rate and keep 34 cents of each additional dollar he earns. In Florida or Texas, he would keep 48 cents. So the tax filer would now boost take-home pay by roughly 41% by moving. The benefit of moving may soon grow even bigger. California voters will decide in November whether to impose a 5% tax on individual net worth exceeding $1 billion. There's talk of similar levies in other blue states. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang says he is perfectly fine with the wealth tax initiative, which would cost him roughly $8 billion. He argues that the Golden State's talent pool and environment are good for high tech. True enough, but a lot of California's wealthiest residents, along with those of New York and other high tax states, are already relocating. An Unleash Prosperity analysis of IRS data over the past 11 years finds that California and New York have lost a cumulative $500 billion of taxable income due to interstate migration. Little wonder that California Governor Gavin Newsom has opposed the state wealth tax initiative while urging a federal wealth tax. The saving grace is that such a tax would almost certainly be unconstitutional. If it weren't, the wealthy and productive would start fleeing not only high-tax states, but high-tax America. The Pepper and Salt cartoon takes place in an office setting where a manager is standing behind his desk looking at his computer screen, and alongside him is a woman, a repair person, holding a sledgehammer in one hand and her valise in the other. And she says to the manager, "I've installed antivirus software on your computer, but just in case, here's our antivirus hardware." You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the August 13th issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening and enjoy the weekend.